Hello and welcome to this POP webinar. I am Tony Collis. I am the CEO of Collis Homes Innovations, my own company. I'm also a success and leadership coach. Thank you to the organisers from POP for inviting me to talk today. Before you're wondering why on earth I'm talking in a webinar from POP, let me just explain a bit about me and my history. So for those of you who don't know, I'm the co-founder of Women in High Performance Computing. I recently stepped down as chair because I have other exciting things that I'm taking on now. But I was previously, before I started out in coaching and inclusive leadership consulting, I was a physicist by training. I have a PhD in physics, and I turned into a supercomputing consultant for many years before moving up into business development and HPC leadership in a startup. And that was quite a few years ago now. During that whole time, I realized that there was a huge issue with the underrepresentation of particularly women. That's one of the things I was looking at, which has led me to what I'm going to be talking about today, specifically how we can be better leaders, more inclusive leaders, and why that's a good thing. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and turn my camera off so you can see my screen in full. Hopefully that's all working. So yes, I'm going to be talking about for the next 20-30 minutes, inclusive leadership to inspire action and innovation. I'm going to be covering what inclusive leadership is, the business benefits. I'm actually going to spend a fair amount of time at the beginning talking about the business benefits, because although if you were here, you probably get why this is necessary. Sometimes the hardest thing is getting buy-in. So I want to give you the data that you can take to others to say, this is why we can't ignore this. So I'm going to spend some time with that. And then what we all need to be doing differently. I am happy to take questions throughout. So if you have questions, send them over to the team running the webinar. They will send them to me. And at various points, I will, if appropriate, I will pause and try and answer your questions. Otherwise, we'll do the questions at the end. We'll see how it all goes. Excuse me. So let's start by talking about the benefits. Why do we need inclusive leadership? First thing first is this thing called the diversity dividend. This is what the benefit is when we have a more diverse team. And I'm going to explain the difference between diversity and inclusion. But the result that we want to be getting to is a more diverse team that is actually fully participating. And here's why. When you have at least one board member, you get a 17% premium on your return on equity for a business compared to 0 board member, female board members. One board member makes a 17% increase in profits, right? If the global workforce had full participation of women, and I am picking on women here because it's the bit that I've done a lot of research on, but there is data out there that supports this for basically every single underrepresented group there is. But if we had full participation of women in the full workforce, in the global workforce, we would have 25% more output, more innovation, more creativity. This is just a good thing, right? We're about discovering and creating outcomes, but we could have far more of that. And when you have multiculturalism, you enhance your team performance. And I want to talk about team performance in particular, because here's the thing. Diverse teams have been proven time and time again since the 1980s to perform better. There are a few caveats in there about your diverse team needs to actually be fully inclusive. Having a one diverse, in quotes, you can't see me doing air quotes there, diverse member on your team who isn't included actually damages the performance. But when you have a diverse team that's fully functioning, your team performs better than the sum of the parts. And here's the other thing. Teams make better decisions than individuals 66% of the time. So you need teams because we perform better as teams than individuals. And if you add in diverse teams, suddenly you do better. And here's the thing. If you're not making decisions, if you're not creating change, if you're not making choices, you aren't growing as a business, you aren't innovating. Everything we do is about making decisions, understanding how to bring about change. Status quo is not what we're in the business of. So if a diverse team improves team performance, teams make better decisions than individuals, teams plus diversity is just good for business. It results in more innovation, increased revenue, increased patents, increased citations, and increased profits. So even if you weren't here because, you know, this is just like a thing, it is just good for business. Most of us are here because we actually think it's also the right thing to do, but you actually need to invest in this if you want to remain competitive. And there are actually multiple studies out there right now that show that the companies who aren't being competitive anymore, who are folding, are the ones who haven't invested in their diversity and inclusion. So let's talk about where supercomputing, high performance computing is, because that's where I'm coming from. Here's the thing, the data isn't very good. We do have data for some years, but it's very poor quality. The number I'm about to show you is an upper estimate. In 2018, the number of women internationally in supercomputing as a discipline was 13%. That's it. When we compare that to other disciplines that are similar, for example, globally, IT workforce is about 25%. STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths, globally is 45% plus. So 13%, we're doing worse than our natural and related fields. So what is going on here? One of the criticisms that I have experienced is, well, criticisms is the wrong word. One of the objections to taking action is the problem isn't here, it's in schools, it's in undergraduate education. But here's the thing, if all these other disciplines where, you know, you've got physics and chemists are heavy users of supercomputing, many of the consultants I used to work with were physicists and chemists, mathematicians, engineers. They have way more women. I even did some preliminary research years ago now that demonstrated the new subjects coming to use supercomputers as a tool, for example, biology at that time, where you've got over 50% of biologists in the UK are female now, we were still getting only about 5% women. So it's no longer acceptable to say that this is because of school age. This is our problem. And I keep saying this to everybody. You've probably heard me say this exact message before, but we have to take ownership of this as a problem. Excuse me, I've got a real bug in my throat today. No, it's not COVID. This is asthma. Okay, so now we know what the picture is and kind of how depressing it is. Why? So we come on to the retention problem. Again, the data here for our niche is not very well understood, so I'm going to look wider to the information about STEM and tech. 80% of women in science, technology, and engineering report that they love their work. So this isn't that women don't love what they do. 56% of women leave their organizations by the midpoint in their career. And when I say they leave, they're actually abandoning their education. They're going to do something completely different. They're reinventing themselves. Great for them, terrible for us, because they aren't just moving organization. We're losing that knowledge, that talent, that education that the world has invested in these people. And they're leaving, excuse me, to go and do something that doesn't utilize their skill set. For comparison, 17% of men leave at the same point. So it's roughly 3 times the number of women leave to men. 32% of women in tech in the US say they're likely to quit within a year. 32%, a third. This should be terrifying because this means that people are seriously unhappy. Well, women are seriously unhappy. The numbers are there for men too. They're much lower. I can't remember the exact stat for men. But here's the thing. It's so much higher for women. We seriously have retention problems. So again, it's not just about blaming the intake. If you've got a leaky pipeline, there's no point in pushing lots of women in one end for the pipeline to be letting them all out in just a few years. We need to fix the retention problem and then go back and fix the recruitment problem. Because here's the thing. If you fix retention, you're going to create a whole set of role models. You're going to create a happy workforce. And suddenly you're being more attractive anyway. So whenever somebody says to you, we just need to go and do more outreach to schools, we need to go and do more of this and that, which is all about bringing people in, they haven't actually realized the biggest problem is right here, right now in the workforce and retaining and keeping our current workforce happy. And before I hear the standard objection, of, well, it's when mothers become mothers, women become mothers, and that's why they leave. Let's just put that one away too. 43% of women do leave STEM employment after their first child, but so do 23% of fathers. So yes, there is a difference there, but that's not the only difference. Also, 43% in STEM, it says to me that there's a real STEM problem in that it's not a great environment to be a parent. And if we can fix this for women, we fix it for those 23% of new fathers as well. And this is just a good thing. There's a lot more that we could talk about on retention. I could do like a whole day on this, but this is the highlight to show you that actually retention is something we really, really need to be focusing on. So let's talk about the change that we need to be making. First of all, we need to focus on inclusion, not diversity. Inclusion is the process, diversity is the outcome. When you create an inclusive culture, a culture where everybody's listened to, where everybody gets a seat at the table, where it's not about who or what you are, it's about the outcomes that you deliver, which is a subtle difference. It's quite often misunderstood because we're really good at not listening to people that we don't want to. But when you create an inclusive culture, diversity is your result. But you need to start with inclusion, not with diversity. We need to educate. We need to be talking about this all of the time. We are having more conversations than ever. When I set up Women in HPC in late 2013 with a launch in 2014, it seemed like I was the only person talking about the underrepresentation of women. There are very few people talking about anything other than women. I know that that's what I talk about, it's what I know about. But there are so many issues with diversity and inclusion. It goes well beyond gender. We need to educate, we need to talk about this. We need to make it an acceptable conversation for every single workplace. We need to realize, for example, that we have biases, both explicit and implicit. We need to realize there's a thing called stereotype threat. I'm deliberately throwing jargon at you here because there is so much that we should be aware of, because those things result in us treating the people around us differently. Microaggressions really do add up to people leaving. There might be one thing that seems trivial that meant somebody left, but it's the 1,000 things that they can't even articulate that they've experienced their entire career that meant that that one thing was the thing that tipped them over the edge. The other change that we need to be making is coaching, mentorship, sponsorship, and advocacy. This is good for everybody, but if you're from an underrepresented group, it's even more powerful. And here's why. Everybody is likely to have some exposure to some of this informally, but here's the scary part. If you are a woman or an underrepresented group, you're far less likely to be offered it formally or informally. And you have a 90% improvement because you start further back if you are from one of those groups. So you're less likely to be offered it if you're in an underrepresented group, plus it's going to have an even bigger impact. Because mentorship is quite often something that leads to advocacy. If you have a mentor who is passionate about what you do, and we often, as people, because of the way the human brain works, we like to mentor people that are like us, which is why if you're in an underrepresented group, you're less likely to be offered it informally. But when you're passionate about somebody you're mentoring, you start sponsoring them, you start being an advocate, you start sitting up in meetings where those people aren't there to represent themselves and saying, hey, what about this person here? They're great. If somebody isn't being mentored, they don't get that that casual sponsorship and advocacy. And here's the other thing with coaching. Coaching can help us navigate difficult situations. It can challenge us to think about a situation differently. It can show us a different way of solving problems, and it makes you more robust. Coaching has been shown to not just make you better at your job, but inoculate you to some of the negatives that come from being in an underrepresented group. And if you're an ally, it can help point out to you the things that you're not noticing and how to be an advocate for the people that you're allying with. The next one we all need to work on more is growth mindset. So this is a relatively new field of study pioneered by Carol Dweck from Stanford. And the whole point here is the majority of 95% of humans have a fixed mindset. We all believe, 95% of us believe that we have a fixed IQ, a fixed ability, a fixed number of things that we can do. The reality is When you change your mindset to believe in growth, actually you can do extraordinary things. And if you're in an underrepresented group, you are far more likely to be damaged by a fixed mindset because you have so many things thrown at you, those microaggressions telling you your whole career. And anybody here who is in an underrepresented group has probably experienced this casual, everyday sexism or racism. You're only here because you're female, you're only here because throwaway comment can do so much damage. And if you have a fixed mindset, it's so much harder to push out of that. If you are an ally, the fixed mindset reinforces any everyday biases you have, which, by the way, we all have them. If you've ever done an unconscious bias test, it's kind of shocking. I am biased against women in tech, despite what I do, because it's an unconscious thing. Society has conditioned me to be unconsciously biased. The growth mindset, developing a growth mindset, helps you challenge those unconscious biases in yourself. And the final one, inclusive leadership. Everything above requires a leadership at the top that says, everybody's here for a reason, everybody has a seat at the table. I'm going to be talking more about what I mean by inclusive leadership. So here's the thing, when you have an inclusive leader, employees report 81% improved performance and productivity, 84% increased motivation, 86% increased innovation and creativity, 79% improved collaboration, and 81% greater engagement and loyalty. This is good for business. Changing the way we lead to be more inclusive is just a good thing. I cannot say that enough. Again, grab this slide, show it to your bosses. This is a good thing. So what does it mean to have inclusive leadership? Well, treating people in groups fairly. So that's pretty obvious, right? But based on their unique characteristics, not on stereotypes. So this isn't about treating somebody the way you think that they should be treated. It's about treating them as the individual that's right there in front of you. It is about personalizing individuals, understanding and valuing their uniqueness, while also acknowledging that they're part of a group. It's very dangerous for us to say, and again, I'm going to pick on the group that I'm in here because it's much easier for me to make stereotypical comments about my own group than it would be for me to say about any other group. So women, oh gosh, they just need more help getting to the top is really unhelpful when you're talking to the individual in front of you. First of all, it pulls out stereotype threat, which is where behavior and results in the individual you're talking to are emphasized and influenced by you reminding them of a stereotype. If you say to somebody, oh, you're proving that the stereotype that women are not good at computing is not true, they will do less well. I'm not kidding. This is a thing. Stereotype threat is a real thing. Applies to men as well, by the way. So you need to acknowledge the person in front of you as an individual, but also if they want to talk about the fact that they're part of an underrepresented group, you need to acknowledge that. You shouldn't be dismissing it. Leveraging the thinking of diverse groups is just a good idea, and this is really where your inclusive leadership needs to turn on. You need to recognize that inclusion in a diverse group really helps your business because you make smarter decisions, which stops your business missing something. Early on in my career, I was talking to a colleague of mine who'd been around at the time when tablets were invented, and particularly keyboards on tablets. Woman, and she was asked to try one of the very first ones out, a very long time ago now, I suspect, and it had been designed entirely by men, and it wouldn't acknowledge her fingertips because they were too small. And this is the thing, if we don't have diverse teams at the table, you're going to miss something big, and this is getting a bigger deal every single day. Because here's the thing, it's now an essential thing to recognize that we are shifting into a truly global economy. Shifting to emerging markets, we have to realize that cultural differences, demographics of our customers and attitudes are changing. You cannot develop just for the people that you know anymore, because if you do, you're not going to be competitive. You need diversity of ideas because we're in a hyper-connected and deregulated business now. Consumption, competition, everything is changing. You see this all the time in the news with How things are being developed in one country and whether they thrive or not really depends on whether or not they figured out how to get it outside their own country. And what we do in supercomputing, the fact that as a community, we're about innovating for the global economy, we're about learning stuff. Think about COVID, for example, the research being done on COVID. Imagine if we weren't considering different ethnic groups, or we were only doing research on men or on women, and we didn't understand the profiles of how people got sick with COVID, or we didn't understand that in some countries, in some cultures, it's going to spread in different ways. All the research that's being done right now to try and stem the flow of COVID around the globe would be meaningless. And this is the thing that requires diversity of input, diversity of talent, diversity of ideas. To leverage these, we need inclusive, out-of-the-box thinking in our leadership. We have to lead in a different way, and we have to get leaders to the top of their game. One of the other things we need that I haven't written here, we don't just need inclusive leadership, we need our leadership to be diverse. So you can be the best and most inclusive leadership, but if you're surrounded by people that look just like you aren't being challenged either. So what can you do? First of all, the one that nobody likes doing, even though everybody says, yes, we're going to do this, look at the real facts about your organization and ideally talk about it. Publish it on your website if you're brave enough. I know not everybody is, but definitely talk about it within your organization. Look at the data. Look at how happy people are. Do a staff satisfaction survey. It may shock you, but if you don't do it, you're just burying your head in the sand. Seek feedback and listen. Have really meaningful 360 reviews. I know a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with performance evaluation, but when it's done well, this is when we can really change the life. And I could do a whole session on what a good performance evaluation, performance review looks like. Most of the ones I've come across are just terrible. They just make the staff member feel like they're under attack and it's a tick box exercise. That shouldn't be what it's about. It should be helping everybody grow to become better. Say what everyone else is afraid of saying. Have the courage to speak up. This is where leadership should come into play irrespective of who you are. I talk a lot in my work about how we are all leaders. It doesn't matter whether or not you have a management title. Yes, it's a whole lot easier to make change if you have a management title, if you are in the C-suite, if you are a senior academic. But here's the thing, all of us have the ability to speak up for inclusion, every single one of us. And if you believe passionately about this, I ask you dearly to step up and be that voice of reason. I was very, very junior in my career when I set up Women in HPC. It was extraordinarily unpopular with certain quarters, but I believed in it and I did it anyway. So please, if you believe in this, have the courage to stand up, because I tell you what, for every single person who does have the courage to stand up, there are 10, 20 that you're speaking for who don't. And they've had experiences where they just simply can't speak up anymore. You might not be able to speak up about everything, but there's maybe some things you can. I've spoken to so many women over the last decade about their career, and some of the stories they tell are simply shocking, and they can't stand up for themselves. They need somebody else to stand up for themselves. They can stand up for somebody else about something that they haven't experienced, but the thing that they experienced often they can't speak up for. So speak up, because I promise you, you're going to benefit someone. If you're the leader and manager, encourage people to push back. This is so important. Do not say from the top, this is how it is. Because you know what, this field is changing so rapidly, just inclusion as an understanding of how we should be operating. You need to change your mind. Just since I've been in this field, it's less than a decade, the best practice has completely changed. For example, unconscious bias training is possibly more damaging than not having unconscious bias training. There's a debate to be had about that, but 5 years ago, unconscious bias training was seen as the thing that everybody had to do. It's now being recognized that actually, in many cases, not all, it makes people more biased. So you need to encourage people to push back, encourage people to have open and frank discussions, and you need to be open to changing your mind. This should be a given as a leader and as a manager anyway. Nobody has all the information, but it's even more important when you're talking about inclusion. Take action on performance issues and specifically toxicity in the workplace. So many workplaces spiral out of control when you have somebody toxic who basically acts as somebody who affects everybody else. I've seen organizations where one toxic person is allowed to get away with something and suddenly everybody else starts behaving that way. The excuse given for not taking action is, well, this person generates so many papers, this person brings in so much money, we can't tackle them. Here's the thing, when you have toxicity like that, you are not benefiting from team performance. And as we've talked about, the team performance always outperforms individuals. It always outperforms the sum of the parts, in fact. But if you've got that toxic person, you've probably never seen the possibility of a proper inclusive team. So don't ignore it, tackle it head on. Sometimes just the smallest conversation can really change somebody. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but it can make a big difference. And it's one of the most important things in terms of improving retention. And remember that retention is one of the most expensive things. For every member of staff that you have to replace, it costs you between 1/2 and 2 times the full-time equivalent cost, because it's not just about recruitment, it's about onboarding, it's all that lost knowledge. So if you can improve retention by fixing one toxic person, it is good for business. The next thing, communicate openly and frequently. Communication is the #1 tool in a leader's toolkit, but you need to be open, you need to be transparent. You need to say the same thing 10 times in 10 different ways because people are not always listening. You want to be cognizant of noise, right? But at the same time, you need to be saying that inclusion is a high priority to this business. If you don't say that regularly, it won't be a high priority anymore. It's really important that you lead change. In fear-based environments, it's all about protecting the status quo. We don't want to change. When you act from a place of fear, you are stifling innovation. So draw a picture of a better way, of a better solution. Show everybody what it could be like to take them away from this fear, this inability to see a different way of doing it. You need to be a change agent, so lead that change. Describe a better approach. Show them what it's going to look like and approach it with an open mind. By the way, it will be messy, but that's okay. You do need some courage to take this, but if you are in a fear-based environment, you need to focus on the fact that you need to get everybody out of that. The next one, which I think many of us are terrible at, I think it's a human trait, is giving credit to others. This is just, again, a good thing. It isn't specifically about underrepresented groups. This is just the right thing to do. When you share praise, it lifts you up, right? A lot of people think that they need to hold on to the thing that they're responsible for. But when you lift the people up around you, it always makes you look better. And those people feel valued and acknowledged, and they get recognized for what they're actually bringing, but it doesn't devalue you. And again, this applies to every single one of us, irrespective of our job title. Share the praise, give credit, and it will benefit all of you. When you share the credit for an idea, for an activity, suddenly those people will start sharing more ideas with you. If you've ever been in the position of, well, I don't share what I do because I might get scooped, it's because those people didn't share the praise that they got for the idea that you shared with them. So don't be that person. Hold people, and particularly yourself, accountable. Expect people to deliver on their commitments around inclusion and call them out when they don't follow through. It's all well and good having these great targets and these great things that you are holding your organization up to, but a lot of these initiatives fail when there's zero accountability. If you are determined to improve the culture of your organization, make it more inclusive and therefore more diverse, you need to make sure that you hold everybody accountable. So the traits of an inclusive leader in summary are cognizance, because you need to be aware that bias is our Achilles heel, and it's your Achilles heel. It is for every single one of us. There is no human on planet Earth that isn't biased. It is what we are, so be cognizant of it. You need curiosity to be an inclusive leader, because different ideas and experiences are great for discovery, for innovation and growth. But you need to be curious, and that applies as much to everything you do, and the inclusive and diversity argument. Curiosity is a good thing. You need to be culturally intelligent because not everyone in the world sees everything the same way. And as we turn into a truly global economy, not just our workforce is international, but the people that use our discoveries, that use our products, that use our innovations, we need to be culturally intelligent. We need to have collaboration because diverse thinking requires a diverse and inclusive team, and remember that your team's performance is greater than the sum of the parts. Excuse me. You need commitment. You need to remember that you need to stay the course, and staying the course on the inclusion and diversity debate is a tough cookie to crack. So you need to be committed to being an inclusive leader and lead the way that you want to be led. You need courage. You're going to be talking about imperfections in yourself and those around you. Your vulnerability actually makes you a better leader, but it is an element of personal risk-taking. In the same way it would be if you are making a business decision, you are taking a risk on behalf of the business. And courage applies just as much when you're talking about inclusivity. So just to wrap up what inclusive leadership looks like. Treat people and groups fairly based on unique characteristics, not stereotypes. Personalize individuals. This is possibly the number one thing, by the way. Value the uniqueness of the people in front of you, but recognize that they're members of groups when they want to be. Leverage the thinking of diverse groups for smarter ideation and decision making, because you know what? This reduces the risk of you being blindsided. So I'm going to wrap up this presentation by talking about setting up a diversity initiative and more to the point, what I wish I'd done differently. So first of all, identify what the issue is. What groups need action? Gather your data and get specific. Take a baseline. Don't be scared of the numbers. If you're resisting gathering data, it's because you're scared of what you might find. So acknowledge that that's how you're feeling and just get on and do it. If you don't have baseline data, you don't know if what you're doing is working. Then ask. One of the things that I've always been frustrated by is when there's this big diversity initiative, nobody thought to ask the group that was supposedly going to be helped by this initiative what they actually wanted. There's a caveat to this, that sometimes those groups don't know what they're missing. The classic is if you look at school-age children and you say, oh, what do you need in order to like science more? They're not going to be able to tell you. The same applies at our level, by the way. But if you don't involve them in the decisions about any initiatives that are going to be set up, you've lost immediately. Ask them. They might have some fabulous ideas, and they'll definitely tell you whether or not that idea that you're sharing with them is just a terrible one. Take action and measure and manage. You're a scientist if you're listening to this, I suspect. So treat it the same way you would do anything. Monitor progress and measure the change, evaluate. Use that baseline data to see whether or not you're making a change. This stuff is slow, but measure, manage, and update your activities. The other big one here is support. A lot of diversity initiatives fail because it's added on as an extra to our workloads. This was certainly me early on in my career. I was passionate about it, but you know what? I had no time for it. Eventually, I was given time for it, and then I built a career around it, actually. But it is a time-consuming thing. If you want it to be taken seriously, you need to support the people doing the work. You need to support the people leading it, who are often the groups that need the assistance. You need to support the allies. You need to give those allies training. I've had so many people come to me saying, I want to support women, but I don't know how. Give them some training, help them along, and make sure you support the actual groups that you're setting out to. Actually talk with them. Remember that support doesn't just stop about when you are doing this work and putting dollars and time into any initiatives. Mentoring and coaching are really up-level people who are in underrepresented groups far more than others, partly because they're less likely to be offered it informally. So remember that something somebody said to me a while back, and I can't remember who, they said to me, women don't need mentoring because they can't do the job. They need mentoring because of the barriers that they face. And it's true. So really remember that one. I've just noticed I have a question. I don't know how long that one's been there. What piece of advice would you give to a new team? Oh, good question. So piece of advice for a new team. So I'm assuming a team that you've just set up, I'm assuming it's all diverse and inclusive. I would set some real clear guidance on how they should communicate with each other. Inclusion fails when you don't listen. So communication is two-way. It's both telling and it's receiving, and receiving from multiple places. So it's setting up expectations around how you're going to communicate, where you're going to communicate, cultural differences. I've been working with somebody recently who's really struggling with the fact that she's got a very international team, and some people are culturally more abrasive than others. And but it's not a personal thing. And just understanding that about the cultural differences is a huge one. So we don't take things personally, we don't get upset by it. And equally, telling other people that this is the way we expect you as a team in this organization to turn up to work and to communicate and to work together. So just setting expectations around communication is probably the number one thing that you need to do to make a new team function. It's even simple things like, we're going to use this piece of software for assigning work. And we're going to have this expectation that we just assign each other work, but not put deadlines on it. Or we'll never assign work without having a conversation about it first. Set expectations, and suddenly when somebody does something because they made an assumption, it will just be taken that little less personally. Because a lot of the time, not all of the time, there is explicit bias and explicitly bad behavior out there, but most of the time, a lot of what's going wrong is when we approach something with different expectations and we just behave a certain way, and then something happens that we don't expect, and it just upsets us, but we don't do anything about it, because you know what, we're human. So setting those expectations up front and center can really, really help. I hope that answered that question. Let me know if it didn't. There's so many ways I could have gone with that question. All right, on to the next slide. So I've just talked about setting up a diversity initiative. Now I want to talk about what I wish I had done differently, which includes changing diversity initiative to an inclusion initiative. This is something I did not know right at the beginning. When I set up Women in HPC, I focused on diversity. Hey, I didn't know any better. I freely admit that. As I said earlier, part of being an inclusive leader is acknowledging when you have learned new information and it's time to change. So what I wish I'd done differently, focus on inclusion. That makes bigger change than focusing on diversity. Get leadership buy-in from day one. If you're senior management doesn't get it and doesn't lead by example, it is so much harder. It's not impossible. I've seen great change led from the bottom, but the thing that they had to do was convince the senior leadership. If your senior leadership is pushing back on what you do, it's just so much harder. So take that data I gave earlier on in my presentation and convince them of the reason for doing this. Get money behind it, get staff effort behind it. Remember, this is change, and therefore you need to implement change management. People do not like change. It's part of who we are. You also need, because of that, to provide a space for non-judgmental, uncomfortable discussions. I've had a number of discussions over the years from people who just were like, I just don't know what to do to help women in HPC, which is what I was talking about at the time. I just don't know what to do. And they had to have a space in order to say things that were politically incorrect. But that was their way of managing their emotions. And that allowed them to then be better allies, right? So yes, I'm like, oh my gosh, this person is going here. But at the same time, if I hadn't provided that space, nothing would have changed. They came out the other side as the most, as the biggest advocates that I've ever had, the greatest allies for women in HPC. But you have to provide that space, and it's very, very uncomfortable. And that space also shouldn't be the burden of the group that you're trying to support. Now, I am a woman and I ran Women in HPC, so I provided that space. But the last thing you should be doing, if you're saying, we're going to do this, hey, I need somebody to step up and do this, do not put the burden on the underrepresented people unless they want it. And particularly, you should not be putting the burden of having those, quite frankly, very uncomfortable discussions on those people unless they've had training in how to do it. But when you do have those discussions, you can truly make a difference. Okay, I've lost my mouse pointer, so I'm going to have to do it. Oh, my mouse pointer is completely gone. Sorry about that, folks. The problems with the screen sharing. I do have one more question, but I need to find my mouse pointer and able to answer that. So I'm going to do questions in just a moment. But just to wrap up, I want to say thank you for listening. Thank you to the folks at POP for inviting me. If you would like to stay in touch, you feel free to email me or stay in touch on LinkedIn. The other thing I wanted to say, because I know some of the people that signed up had some specific questions, which we're going to come to, I'm hoping in a moment. I've just dropped a link below where you can find out more about leading women in tech. And in particular, there's a podcast that I hope was going to be launched by this webinar, but I'm waiting on Apple to approve it. For some reason, that takes forever. And I'm going to be talking more about leadership and being women and how we can be more inclusive leaders on that podcast, which is launching any day now. The other announcement I wanted to make before I take questions is, as you can hopefully tell, I am passionate about careers, leadership, women in tech, underrepresented groups in tech. And so one of the things I am is a leadership coach. And so I'm going to offer 5, I just say this, like I was like, I'm ignoring about whether to do this. I'm going to offer 5 free coaching sessions to anybody who's watched this seminar. If you drop me an email to tony.collis@chi.scot, I will hopefully offer the first 5 people to do that a free coaching session. Okay, so let's see if I can get my mouse back. I'm going to turn on my camera again. Hopefully you can all see me. And open some questions. Oh gosh, lots of questions to come in now. Excellent. Okay, next question. Who has inspired you the most at the start of your career, and more importantly, why? Oh wow, many people. So I've been very lucky to be surrounded by some amazing role models. 2 in particular stand out as influential in my career. Alison Kennedy, who was my boss in my first job. She's now at STFC. She showed me what it meant to be a female leader and to lead by inspiring action, and really set me on the path to realizing there's a better way to do leadership. And the other person who's been very influential in my career more recently is Trish Dan-Kroger, who is a VP of HPC at Intel. I met her before she did that, and again, she has this extraordinary ability to get people to do stuff with her without really asking them to. I don't know if she knows she does that, and if she watches this, she'll be like, what? But she's truly extraordinary. She has an amazing ability to really get everybody around her to just be passionate at delivering outcomes, and it's not about who you are or what you look like or where you come from. And quite simply, it's extraordinary ability, and I think all of us should try and be more like that, because it doesn't feel like hard work when you work for somebody like that. So a point, have you done any research on managing diverse teams? I think this is one of the difficulties of diversity, which I feel that no one has really figured out properly. So I haven't done any research myself, but there is a lot of research out there. I'm trying to think of the name of the lady who does most of the work on this. It's been around since the 1980s. And I can, if you email me this question, I'll try and find some of the resources for you. So here's the thing. Managing diverse teams, you're spot on, is one of the hardest things, how to manage those relationships such that people actually listen to each other when you've got this diverse team. And certainly the early research in the 1980s showed that when you had just one woman on an all-male team or one man on an all-female team, you got less good performance than if it was all male or all female. And that was because those people weren't fully included. And part of leading a diverse team, managing a diverse team, is making sure those people are leaded and are listened to. So again, it's about that communication thing. And that first question I answered, what piece of advice would you give to somebody setting up a new team? Set expectations around how you are going to communicate, how you're going to assign work to each other, because some people will do it one way, some people will do it another. Do peers assign work? Does everybody go up to the manager? Set expectations around how team meetings will operate. always, always, always make sure that you send out summaries that are written down of decisions, even if you don't send formal notes, because I've seen so many teams fall apart when they all think they're on the same page in a meeting. They go off and do a week's work. They come back together and they're all like, no, that's not what I meant. And the team just starts to disintegrate. It's very easy to think you know what has been agreed, but writing it down really makes sure that people agree. Because when you see the email come in, you're like, no, 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 that's not what I said. So always have a record that's emailed around after a meeting of decisions. The other thing for managing diverse teams is make sure everybody has a voice. Be a strong meeting chair. Have powerful one-to-ones. One-to-ones are way more powerful than team meetings, by the way. Team meetings really only serve one good purpose, which is to make sure everybody else knows where they fit in a bigger puzzle. The team meetings, which are just updating the manager because the manager doesn't want to go around everybody, that's when you find out people don't listen anymore. They just sit and they do their email. They're not good use of resources. So have meaningful one-to-ones as well as the team meeting where everybody realizes that everything that's being said is very useful for them. If you find that people are just not reading their emails, that's your fault as a manager for not providing a good use of everybody's time. Okay, next question. Can you provide a practical example of the difference between focusing on inclusion and focusing on diversity? What should be done differently, or what different actions should be taken to make sure that the focus is on inclusion? So, inclusion versus diversity. There is a subtlety here and it is difficult, so I'm actually glad that you've asked this question. When you focus on diversity, it's very much about plugging the gap. And again, I'm going to focus on gender here because it's the bit I've done most work on. Just get more women in the door, get more women in the door. When you focus on inclusion, you tackle the microaggressions, you tackle the unconscious behavior. Early on in my career, I worked with somebody who wasn't openly gay, but they were gay. And when I started working in this area, they said to me, I don't go to the coffee room anymore because there's just too many casual conversations about how being gay is bad. That's a microaggression. When you focus on inclusion, you tackle that stuff. When you focus on diversity, you say, how many blacks, how many women, how many Asians, how many gay people? First of all, but I don't want everybody to be having to say what they are all the time. I wish we could get to the point where we didn't have to say, I have this label attached to me. As somebody who likes data, it's very useful to monitor where you are. But if instead we shift the conversation to, how can I make everybody, whoever they are, feel like they enjoy being at work, which often starts with talking to the people who are marginalized first. But you need to make sure everybody at work enjoys being there. If they don't, that's when you have a problem. So that's the real difference. Diversity plugs the gap, just says we need more of these people. Inclusion focuses on making sure that everybody turns up and brings their whole selves to work and doesn't feel penalized for being them whole selves, whatever version of a human being they are. Version? I'm going to say that wrong. Okay, next question. I think we all agree that diversity is good, but it comes with challenges and costs. So this is more a statement, but I am going to challenge that one. Challenges and costs. Yes, challenge, but then isn't life one big challenge? Costs. Actually, here's the thing. We think it's a cost, but no, it's not. It's, as I've just shown you, the return on investment is enormous. You wouldn't be saying that if it was a supercomputer. Sorry, I'm calling whoever said this one out. You wouldn't be saying that it was a cost if it was a supercomputer. You would just say it was an investment to be able to do something. The same is true with this work. It is an investment in doing something better, and the return is you have a higher performing, more innovative, more creative workforce. You get dollars out if you put dollars in every single time. So yes, it does seem, it is a cost up front, but it's no more of a cost than any other business innovation, actually. It is a challenge, yes, I will admit that, but it's only a challenge again in the sense that every innovation we do is submitting a grant proposal is a challenge, it's hard work. Writing a paper, gosh, I don't miss writing papers. It is a challenge, it's hard work, but you know, treat it like that, and suddenly it's like, okay, it's just a new thing. And it is, follow up, it is the cost and challenge that doesn't seem to get much coverage and sometimes hidden away. Yes, agreed. So maybe I should have read that one before I answered. So it sounds like you're on the same page with me, which is awesome. It is something that's hidden away. We actually should be talking about this more upfront and center, because then we can talk about the return on investment better. Okay. What concrete steps can I take to make sure we have women and BAME speakers at an HP conference symposium? Okay, this is a good one. So this is actually also one of the hardest things I found. I've run a number of conferences. One of the ones that I most struggled with on this one was I was part of the team that ran the Euro NPI conference in, I don't know when it was in Edinburgh a few years ago, or long enough ago that I've forgotten when. And, you know, I was running Women in HPC at the time, passionate about this, and I'm like, we need women speakers. You know what, I get that it's hard. It was hard to identify women because NPI is a community. The NPI forum is wonderful and shares data with women in HPC about how many women they have. It's pretty damn low. And so finding speakers is hard. But here's the thing, concrete steps that you can take. First of all, look at the people who are organizing. One of the classics is you will look for people in your own network, and people in your network, have a look through your LinkedIn list. I bet they all look like you. In HPC, quite often, even if you are a woman or a BAME, I don't know if that's correct, apologies there, you may well still find lots of white men because HPC is so dominated by white men. Nothing against them, by the way, but we tend to look in our immediate circle. We also tend to look for the people that we've seen speak. The number of times I'm like, can you give us an example of somebody who you've really admired speaking? The problem with that is that you're not bringing new people in. You're keeping the same people on the speaking circuit. So be brave is your first concrete step. Look outside your immediate circle and put somebody new on the stage. There are truly extraordinary people out there from underrepresented groups. Go and speak to them on Zoom. Just even if you don't want to put somebody on the stage you've not seen speak before, go and have a conversation with them. See if they're passionate, see if they've got something worth saying. Go and look at some authors of some research that you are excited by. Go and speak to them. And don't just default to the senior person. The other mistake is to allow the people you invite to then divert you to somebody else. And if this is you, then I have some tactics here. So the classic is, I don't want to speak, here's somebody that you should consider instead. Now this can both be a good thing and a bad thing. If you are saying, I can't speak or I don't want to, but consider this person instead, partly because look outside your immediate circle, look for somebody who's underrepresented, they're still extraordinary, that's a good thing. But I've had women turn down speaking slots and say, no, I didn't really do that work, have my male colleague. We shouldn't be doing that. We absolutely shouldn't. So as an organizer, it's really important that you keep control, you acknowledge the great suggestions, but you keep control of who is invited. If you deliberately try and invite some people that you think would do great and they suggest somebody else, don't allow them to control that. Have a good look at your list of speakers, because here's the other thing. It's a really tricky one to get a balance between like representing and having a good representation of the science, the output, but also recognizing that we're perpetuating a problem by not showcasing the extraordinary talent. You need to be aiming for at least 20 to 30% of underrepresented groups in your speakers list. And most conferences don't even come close to that. So have a goal. I would say goal, not a you know, a quota. A quota makes it like, it encourages positive discrimination, which I'm not a fan of. But if you have a goal, it's like, can we achieve that and still put on an amazing program? And it makes you think outside the box. And it's a really difficult one. So I don't have like a this will work, but it's one step in the right direction. Okay, A practical question about career development in an organisation that is resistant to change. At what point is it better to focus on looking for other opportunities than investing in trying to change the environment in a current organisation? Would that be a personal decision? Yes, every single time. This is one of the things, one of the reasons why I am now a career and leadership coach, is because, and I focus on coaching women in technology more than just HPC, the whole tech industry, because sometimes you do just need to you need to be selfish. I used to say naively, I'd be like, no, women, you have to stay, you have to fight the battle for all of us, you have to do this, you have to, you know what? It's a bit like the whole thing of put your own mask on first before somebody else's. You need to look after you first. You have to make sure that you are taken care of, and then you can fight the battle. So if you are in an organization where you are stalling, where your career isn't going well, it is time potentially, and I can't make this decision for you, nobody else can, to look at your other opportunities. If you feel like you're thriving and it's just that your organization's resistant to change, you have to make a decision about how important that is to you. Now, I would love for you to really enjoy that journey and be an advocate for change, but I also get how hard it is. So yes, it's a personal decision and nobody can tell you what to do. If whoever it is was asking that and would like to have a chat about that, then do drop me an email and I can help you explore what your options are. Right, I think that's everything. Thank you ever so much to the organisers for having me. I hope this has been helpful. And I look forward to maybe meeting some of you at some point in the future. Thank you.